Today we're at Ravensworth Elementary School in Springfield, Virginia. We're going to meet some bereaved children as well as talk with teachers and counselors, sharing with them how they can further help children who are grieving the death of a loved one. Hi, I'm Helen Fitzgerald, Training Director of the American Hospice Foundation. Come, join us. In this video, you'll be introduced to children who have endured personal losses. We'll have a short session with them to find out how they are doing. Then we'll meet several teachers to demonstrate how art and literature can be used to help students express their grief. Okay, now, I know that a lot of you kids have had somebody important in your life.
Yeah. Antoine, you said you had a lot of people die in your family.
And some people I never met. My uncle, one of my uncles that I never met, and one of my grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
See, they died when I was a baby.
Emily,
Okay.
you had very important people in your family who died.
Yes, my mother died in her early 30s from cancer.
That's what my kid's dad died from, was cancer. Does everybody die who gets cancer?
No, not necessarily.
That's right.
Some people still live through it.
That's right. Some people can live with it. How old were you when she died?
Well, I was in the 2nd grade, so I was 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm. That's how old my youngest daughter was when her dad died. And?
I had 2 people die in my family. One was my great-grandfather, who died like a couple days after I was born.
Yeah.
And my mother died in her late 30s from heart failure.
Mm-hmm. Who died in your family?
My grandfather, my mom, one of my mom's brothers, one of my uncles that I never met, and my grandfather. It was my dad's sister, Elizabeth, when she was born.
When she was born?
November, I think, 23rd. She died after November 24th.
She was just a tiny, tiny baby.
She was just born November 24th.
So it's not always old people that die, is it?
Died the next day.
This is that story about Arvy, and we talked about what aardvarks are, and they're kind of animals with great big long snouts. And what happened to Arvy was that his brother and his mother were taken to a zoo. So some...
You said sister before.
Did I say sister? Well, let's say sister then. His mother and his sister. Maybe I can find that as we get into the story a little bit. And all the animals came. It's kind of like a funeral, so that when somebody dies, everybody comes. Now, his mother and sister didn't die, but you know what? It is brother. But it's like you'll never see them again. So in a way, it's kind of like that, isn't it? All the animals came, and they wanted to make him happy. And then one day, Arvy was listening to Ralphie, and he said, "Are you sure that Shaylee is really dead?" Arvy asked Ralphie one day, "Maybe she'll come back someday." Can people come back after they've died?
No.
We can wish, and that's what he's doing.
And he said, like, when they were asleep, that reminded me when I didn't want to see my grandma at the wake. I was going to pretend that she was really just sleeping.
Yeah.
Like, I just didn't want to.
You didn't want to see her because you wanted to pretend she was just sleeping?
Yeah, and I was scared, and I knew I would cry, and I felt like I wanted to cry then.
Is crying okay?
Yeah.
Is it okay for guys to cry?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it gets the sad out. It gets the sad out. We got to get the sad out. "Goodbye, beautiful Clarice," said Ralphie. "Goodbye." And together, Arvy and Ralphie placed Clarice the bird into the hall. They laid green leaves over her. Then Ralphie stepped back and looked at Arvy, and he was waiting, and he says, "You have to say goodbye, Arvy." How can we say goodbye?
Sometimes if you want to say goodbye to someone who died, you can, like, pray to them.
Sometimes we pray.
Goodbye while we pray.
That's right.
You can cry.
You can cry. If we say goodbye, does that mean we're going to forget them?
No.
No. Arvie just looked at his friend Ralphie Rabbit and he felt a little confused, but he trusted Ralphie, and inside himself, Ralphie's words felt comfortable, and Arvie nodded. Come on, my friend, said Ralphie, let us sing, because sometimes we sing at funerals. It wasn't easy, but they sang, and the words they sang were, Clarice, Clarice,
Oh, beautiful one, you lived,
you played,
you flied, you died.
Clarice, Clarice, and they sang that.
Sang it many times.
They sang it many times.
Cool, I got it at the book.
That was kind of a nice book, wasn't it? Would you get that big white piece of paper for me, and let's get here in the middle of the floor. Yeah, let's think about some feelings that we heard in this story. Let's see what we can come up with. Okay, and let's put this way. Okay, this is the way we're going to do this. What is this one?
It's sad.
Real sad. And it's,
Somebody dies.
he said real sad.
Really sad.
Yeah.
Very good job.
Thank you. Who would like to add a feeling? And they could be upside down and all over.
Upside down. Cool.
And all over. Pick a feeling. It can be the same one I did. Here you go. Oh, I brought just enough markers. And let's just make this a feeling poster. Maybe you can put it in the library here when we're done with it.
Okay.
That would be fun, wouldn't
I
it?
know something.
Okay.
Lonely.
Lonely's a good one because you feel very lonely when somebody dies.
And
Think about a feeling that you had or that Arvie or Ralphie had.
I closed it up.
That's a great one, Emily.
I don't know what to make because I accidentally made that. I was trying to make something else. But how did you
Here's a good one. Kind of leave me alone. Were people kind of all over you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get so many hugs you feel like your body's getting crushed.
Yeah, and then everybody's always saying, oh, I know how you feel, but then you think about it, they don't know how you feel.
No. You know, I have worked with hundreds of kids, and I can't tell you I know how you feel, because everybody's different. This is a great poster. What should we call this poster? We need a name for the poster.
The feeling poster.
The feeling poster? I think, who said the feeling poster?
I did.
I said,
Okay, we need to write that on here. Let's put it here then. Feeling. Let's see, how does an N go?
Like,
That's an N. I declare that an N. The feeling. Oh, it doesn't look quite right, does it? I should have had you guys do
there's
it.
supposed to be an O right here too.
It's P-O-S-T, yeah. What is the feeling you're working on?
I'm doing like an angry.
Angry. How does it, show her an angry mouth, guys. What's an angry mouth look like? Kind of like that, just kind of small. Kind of look, sometimes the teeth are showing. Ooh, my goodness. Is that mad or what? And glad? Why were you glad? How did that fit into your feelings?
it didn't really fit into my feelings on that day, but I just put that there because I just wanted to put it there because sometimes I'm glad to remember her.
Sure. I've really enjoyed meeting you. You know, I'm never going to forget you guys.
Oh, you gotta remember us.
Absolutely.
This poster?
Absolutely, I'll never forget you guys. I like to prepare children now for death in the future. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. And one would be to read a book about grief and loss, just as we did, and just talk a little bit about that and the characters in the book and how it has affected them. Parents are going to be coming to you for advice because you spend more time with their kids sometimes than they do because of people working and what. And they're going to be asking you, should we take a child to a funeral? Should we take Sarah to visit her grandmother who's dying? And I think kids can handle funerals and visitations at the hospitals at a very early age. But children that are being taken to the hospital and children that are being taken to the funeral must be prepared and kind of told about what they're going to see and what the experience is going to be like for them and feelings that they might have. And with preparation, children can handle these things at a very young age, sometimes much easier. The parents and the adults in the family are the ones that are having the hard time with this and crying. It's important to use the correct language. You know, he has died, rather than we've lost him, because if we've lost him, maybe we can find him again if we're very careful and search very diligently. Sometimes you can look for a death teaching opportunity, which might be a classroom pet that has died. And a lot of classrooms have gerbils, and you can talk about the gerbil that has died and what the gerbil could do when that gerbil was alive, and what the gerbil can't do now because he has died. I remember my daughter was about 9, and her stepbrother a couple years younger, and she was pretty comfortable with death and dying because of all the work I'm doing in it. And they found a dead bird at the beach, and she wanted to go up and explore this dead bird. Well, fortunately, my stepson's a little more germ conscious, and he wouldn't let her touch it until he ran up to the condominium, emptied 2 loaves of bread, put plastic bags on his arms, then went out and they explored what the dead bird was like, or what the dead, what a dead body felt like, the limpness of it and the coolness of it, as the kids were talking about earlier. It's important to know developmental differences and how children perceive death. The preschoolers or the kindergartners are very direct with their questions, like what is dead, what makes people die, where do people go when they die. And of course, when there is a death in the family, it is an opportunity for parents to teach their children the religious part that they want their children to learn. Can we visit him yet? A little 5-year-old was taken to Disney World when her father died. And on the way home, she said Disney World was really fun, but next year can we visit Daddy in heaven? And they sometimes see this as a place they can go and come to. Death is reversible. It's not final. They unless they've been given other information, they believe the deceased continue to eat and breathe and sleep and when they're dead. Children 5 to 9 know that death is happens to other people, but generally it's just old people. They see death as in some form of tangible spirit, like a ghost or a boogeyman. They're all reading ghost bumps. They're telling ghost stories. Nobody would go in the cemetery at night, especially now that Halloween is coming, for fear of what might rise out of the grave and grab them. Children 9 and 10 are much more in touch with the fact that death is the end of bodily life. It happens to different ages of people. It has many different causes, including murder and suicide. And this is the age they have nightmares of their parents dying. And if you've ever had a bad dream as a child about getting in touch with the fact that your parents could die, you were somewhere around 9 or 10. With adolescents, death is romanticized, and that's further supported sometimes by the English literature that they're reading, such as Romeo and Juliet. They love Thelma and Louise. They will fantasize their funeral if they've had a fight with dad or a breakup with the boyfriend, how bad and sad everybody would feel. They challenge death more. Do children grieve? Sure. A friend of mine says, and I agree with him, that if children are old enough to love, they're old enough to grieve. And I do believe that. And for 5 years, we've even had a preschool bereavement group, and we've seen good results from that. Their grief is different. They grieve more sporadically than adults. They're much more capable of flipping the switch and going off as if nothing happened, and that's normal for children. But they will go back and revisit that grief every time they go through a developmental age or stage, or some big event happens in their life. I've seen that over and over again with my own kids, who were 8 and 11 and 13 and 15 when their father died. And just recently, my daughter, who is now 33, had to go to a funeral. And she said, all I could see was Dad lying in the casket. So you go back and you revisit that a lot. Children will spend more time searching for the person who's died, looking for and searching for. And that's one of the important factors about taking children to funeral. It helps with the reality of what has happened. And we may see regression in children, back to having accidents in their pants with the younger ones, and going back to thumb sucking. I was working with a little girl once whose mother died, and she would constantly draw pictures of her and her aunt shopping for baby clothes, and she would crawl around on the floor. She wanted to go back to a safer age, I think, and kids will retreat back to a safer, happier time. When I started working as director of the grief program for mental health services in Fairfax County, like 23 years ago, a long time ago, I was getting so many referrals from schools that I really began to work with kids in groups so that I could work with bigger chunks of children and they could learn to help each other. We have a memory wall that the kids can work on while they're waiting for the group to start. The memory wall is a place where they can write a message to the person who has died. It's kind of a one-time thing, but if they have another message 2 weeks later they want to write, that's okay as well. But you can see some things on there. To Dad, I love you. Love, Les. Sometimes they will say, I'm sorry that I made you cry. Things like that can go on this memory wall as well. Why have you come to see me? This little girl drew a picture of her mother's funeral. She makes herself look like a young adult, and she's 8 years old. So obviously she feels like she has a lot of responsibility now. And as she talked about that, she really wished that there was a portrait of her mother hanging above the casket so people could see what she really looked like. This is a little boy whose mother was stabbed, and she died outside their apartment. There's the blood from her heart and the blood on the sidewalk. He drew this over and over and over again, trying to comprehend it. And one day he came in and says, don't tell me what to draw. He drew a picture of his mother without the blood, folded her up, put her in our casket, which was a shoebox, and we were meeting in a library. We had a niche on the shelf, stuck her in our burial niche on the shelf, made a sign that he taped over the top that said, rest in peace, Lisa, the name of his mom, and said, there, which really told you he was ready to move on and put that behind him. But he needed to draw that over and over. And in this case, we then cut out pictures of people feeling those feelings. So they began to identify those in other people's face. This is my favorite one right here. I love nauseous. I love nauseous. And I haven't personalized the feelings yet, but then I start making them more personal. Sometimes we'll do a feeling box, and the younger the child, the bigger the box. And it's just the same size squares, 4 in a row, down, and 1 on each side, and they can pick the feelings they want on their box. And then it all gets folded up and taped. And then the way we play this game is we toss it in the air, and when it lands on a feeling, we talk about when you had that feeling. And almost always when their parents come to collect them, they'll want their parents to do this with them. So again, it's nice dialogue going. So this is a feeling box that it's very easy to do. And they're just the same size squares. Now for the little people's group, our box is about this big, because their little hands would smash that one very quickly. Children are sad when someone dies. They don't always know how to articulate it, but boy does it come out in their artwork. Sad. Here's a little girl whose father died, and her father's name is Bill, and she's searching for him. What is she saying? Bill, 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 Bill. She's calling to him. And her sad is this huge chunk above her head, held up only by these spindly little legs. At any moment, it can come crashing down on her. She just really shows you there how overwhelming the sad is. I work very closely with art therapists, and when I have drawings like this, I really talk to them about it so they can direct me sometimes. And many of the children that I have seen are in therapy in addition to attending the groups that I do. And I'm really worried about that SAD. How do you like this one? Saddish. This is a very young child. The arms and the legs are still coming out of the head as these little ones draw, but look at that. Is that sad or what? And they seem to be able to express so much more on paper, and that's why it's so important. As we begin to talk about these things, they are beginning to learn to articulate them. We spend a lot of time on anger with kids because that's usually how their feelings come out, is in disruptive behavior. Most of the referrals I've had over the years are from schools. The kids are causing problems there. We do all kinds of things about anger. We talk about what makes you mad. We talk about where do you feel it first in your body. So how do you know you're getting mad? We talk about things that you do when you're mad that are going to get you into more trouble. And then I tell them, I'm going to show you how to have fun when you're mad. And there's a list, and you have it in your manuals, of things to do instead of hurting. And we act this stuff out. We think about things that make us mad, and we go through this list one person at a time, and we act this stuff out. It might be throwing the Nerf ball against the wall. It might be drawing a mad picture and tearing it up and throwing it around. It might be then basketball cleanup. It might be a tape recorder. We can make mad sounds. But we do have fun, and all at once they're laughing and we're having fun getting mad, and so much so that one time after we finished group, one of the kids ran to her mother and says, "I can hardly wait to get mad again." We had so much fun. And when I use the tape recorder to make mad sounds, they always ask me, "Can we use cuss words?" And I always say, "No, sorry, I don't want you to ever think there's an appropriate time to use cuss words, but you can make up some words." And almost always they will want their parents to listen to that tape and hear they're mad. Sometimes you just have to look at the art that the kids are drawing. And we weren't really talking about being scared or anything, but all at once I noticed these ominous kinds of witchy things in her drawings. And I encouraged her to tell me, "What are you drawing? What are these things?" And she was scared. When her mother died, someone said, "Your mother will always be up there watching over you." Well, this was kind of a mischievous little girl, and she wasn't sure she wanted her mother watching over her all the time. So she had confined her to one room of the house, which she wouldn't go into after it got dark. But these are things that came out of this, just observing that these drawings were looking a little ominous. I got scared when my mom is very late to pick me up from somewhere, and I will tell parents that if you are going to be late, call. And now with cell phones, it's very easy to do, but if you are late and you haven't called your child, they're going to be convinced you're dead alongside of the road somewhere. Help, scared. And she's asking for help. And again, we talk about what is scaring you the most, what do you need help with, and get them to talk a little bit further about that. There's a little boy whose father was trimming branches and hit a hot wire. But once they draw that, then they can put it over there and begin to reconstruct their lives. Sometimes we need to educate the parents that this is healthy. Let's get it out and let them do that. We talk about fears, things you have to worry about now that you didn't have to worry about before. And generally what I do with fears is I cut little strips of paper, and they write their fears on these little pieces of paper, and we roll them up, poke them into a balloon, and then blow up the balloon and tie it off. And they can have as many balloons as they have worries or fears. And then we play the game of keeping the balloons off the floor. And so they get all mixed up, except there'll always be one child who's going to hang on to her balloons. And then we break them one at a time and read each other's fears. And it's very comforting for them to know that other kids worry about the same things. The most common ones is that I'm going to catch this illness, I'm going to die too, or somebody else will die. And another one is the house will catch on fire, which I think is a developmental fear. Guilt is the hardest thing to get at because they don't really understand that. They kind of feel responsible and they feel like they control everything in their lives. And there are a number of things, depending on the age of the child, that I will use with guilt. One might be writing a letter to the person who died. Another might be getting a helium balloon and writing things on the balloon that you feel badly about. Or sometimes I will have them draw a picture of something that happened that you wished you could do over again. Sometimes to get at that, I will use paper bag puppets. These are just lunch bags, and they get two, one for the person who died and one for them. And they can have a conversation with that person who died. A lot of times I have some inside information, so I will take on the puppet of the person who died, and I can direct the conversation around to some really touchy things. I do things with dreams, because a lot of this comes out in bad dreams, and if kids are having bad dreams, and oftentimes they can't remember them the next morning, so I suggest to parents that they talk to the child about the dream in the middle of the night when they wake up. Then we talk about legends, the legend of the dream catcher. And if you've read books about dream catchers, there are two thoughts. One is that it catches the bad dreams and the good ones go through, and then you read another book, it's the opposite. So when a child came back and said, my dream catcher didn't work, I had a bad dream last night, you have to think fast on your feet. I said, turn it around, and it worked. As the kids read these in the classroom, with, hopefully teachers with some training if they're not comfortable, but some people are just automatically comfortable, can lead a discussion, kind of like what we did here today. I like this one, A Birthday Present for Daniel, and it's a story about a little boy whose brother dies, and even though it's his birthday comes up, they can still have a birthday party, and they launch balloons. I love R.V. Aardvark, and but you have to translate a little bit the animals into people and how it ties in. A lot of times when I'm doing groups, I'll be reading a story, a chapter a week. And this is one that I use a lot. And I usually make Xerox copies of a page so they can be coloring pictures while I'm reading the story. And sometimes the kids want to read. I love this one, I'll Love You Always. Do you know that one? About a dog that dies. It's for younger children. And The Dead Bird is an old one. And it's a great book. It's now on video, but the children find a dead bird and they have the ritual of the funeral. And the other one that we missed there is called Hurt. This is a fairly new book, and I really like this for a lot of different ages. But this little boy has his feelings hurt by a friend, and he doesn't do anything about it. He just takes his hurt home. And you can see this little round ball that he carries with him, that's his hurt. And then his father yells at him, so the hurt gets bigger. And then something else happens, and the hurt gets bigger. And it's pretty soon, it's so big he can't even get into his own room anymore. And then he starts talking to his dad. And he says, you know, Dad, that really hurt my feelings. You didn't notice that I put my books away when you scolded me about leaving my clothes lay around. The hurt got smaller. So you learn that talking about it, it can get smaller and smaller, and finally it got to the point where he could push the hurt out the window. And so then I'll talk to the kids, what kind of a hurt have you had in your life? And we'll talk about what helps you when you're hurting about something, what makes things worse.
Well, first of all, the dream catcher was really dramatic for me. For a child to be able to have a very concrete expression, not just to use words, but to use the senses of touch, and then to design some type of a dream catcher, that it has a front side and the back side, that some of the dreams are good, some of the dreams, maybe they get away, maybe it sort of holds it in. I love the dream catchers. Another thing that I felt that I really want to take away is just the idea of the drawings and really trying to process with children. When they do a drawing, they don't just do a drawing, they're seeing the whole picture in their minds. Everything is getting replayed. And for them to be able to express that in a very concrete and visible way without having to use a lot of words at first, it's just feelings that are coming out and spontaneous expression. I think that that's really dramatic for them and very helpful.
Well, one thing that I really will use is the books that you mentioned. I will go to the bookstore I know and find those books, and they're a very good starting point with students, because I feel we want to help them in the schools, but you feel a little bit helpless when you're beginning something like this. So they're a very good developmentally appropriate way to begin a grief group or an individual grief work. And then I also really thought that the artwork was special, because again, you feel helpless. How can I help this child work through this? And with them getting different avenues of art available to them, through clay, through drawing, through painting, through these different mediums, that they can really work through the grief process, and that frees them up to learn and to be there in school, available for learning, and then to go on and to have some kind of healing and closure.
Well, I'm a student. I'm a graduate student at Marymount University, and I need to learn how to do these sort of groups in my training for being a school counselor. And I don't know, grief, to me, when you break it down, it seems kind of abstract, and you really helped me to break it down and think about it as far as memories and wishes, and needed to touch on guilt and fears. And that's something that is more concrete to me and something that I can work with. And I think it's things that you forget about when you're thinking about a child grieving.
We have been fortunate to receive a grant from the Open Society Institute's Project on Death in America, which is part of the Soros Foundation, to bring to schools throughout the country Grief at School, a program which aims to teach school counselors, teachers, librarians, social workers, psychologists, how to help children who are grieving, how to introduce the language of grief and death into the classroom as if it's normal part of life, and also how to create grief support groups that grieving children could benefit from, in which they can learn how to cope with their grief in a healthy kind of way. We see in our work with hospice that death and grief issues are still taboo in our society, and we hope that by bringing into the classroom, into the schools, we will break that taboo apart, just as we did with sex education, with drug education in the past, because we learned years ago that if you don't talk about sex, you don't talk about drugs, the consequences are dire. And we know, too, that if you don't let children express their grief issues and their powerful emotional feelings, the consequences there could be dire in the form of depression, violence, and other kinds of self-destructive behavior. So we hope that this Grief at School program can be a way of teaching children healthy coping skills throughout their lives.
Children really are our teachers. We learn from the children, from our children. They know how they feel. They know what they want. They know what their needs are. We only need to listen to them and to hear them. Children are capable of grieving at any age. They know what hurts. They know what they need to help. I enjoyed looking at the teachers today and watching them take notes and ask questions, and I was interested in their interest as they were thinking about children in their schools and things that they would be doing when they went back to their own individual schools. I really do believe that a program like this should be in every school. I really do believe and would love to see groups for kids in every school, and hopefully someday that will happen.